So, welcome back. We are supposed to be making a new block and trying it out. After my last video of extolling the virtues of creative mess and all the rest of it, it's finally got to the point where I have to tidy up because I can't find all my fabric. I know that some of it's under here, but there's been so many, look at it. There's been so many different bits just chucked on here. There's some mending, there's dressmaking, so it's time. It's time to tidy up. Look, some of my pictures, some of my artworks. I don't know where to put them. Where should I put these? Should hang them up on the wall maybe. Yeah, first of all I have to tidy up. Okay, I have done some tidying. I can't say it's completely tidy, but it is a lot more organised. So I think it's time to get on with the main thing of this video, and maybe I'll do some more tidying on another day. The main thing is I found the fabric to do this with. So I did this design, and it's probably a version of log cabin. It's certainly going to start off in that way. The difference is it's going to have some half square triangles in it, and because I don't want to make them too small, I have to think about what size I want this. So I'm going to look at one block and I'm going to try and draw it out for you. So it starts off with a square in the middle, like traditional log cabin, and then the next part is also the same. So we build out one side and then the other side. So normally we'd be worried about what the middle colour was going to be and then where we're going to put lights and darks. I want it to look like a water lily, and I think it does look a little bit like a water lily, and I'm thinking in tones of the sort of colours that you see in Monet's water lily paintings. There's loads of them in different museums around the world. So there's predominantly actually the main colour is blue, although it doesn't look it, but it is. There's a lot of blue in here. And I wanted it to be quite a scrappy quilt too. Ultimately, I think I'm going to make this out of silk ties. But because I've done the design before I found the ties, yeah, it might not be the best way around of doing it. So I thought what I'd do is I'd have a go at it with just things that I have here, and I'll show you some fabrics in a minute, and actually test out the block with you and see how it actually works and how it comes together. So going back to the block, then the next thing that we do is, instead of continuing round like you would normally with a log cabin, we're going to put on a side here. We're going to build it out unevenly. We're going to keep working this way for a little while. The main thing that's going to be hard to keep track of in this is where the colours go and where the half square triangles go. I'm not too worried about if the blues are mixed up here. I think it would be nice to have it all the same way around, but given that it's a scrappy quilt, I don't think it's really that important. You know, I might make it all lighter blues and then all darker blues, but they will probably still be mixed. My main problem that I have is the colours for the middle, but I'll talk about that bit in a minute as well. So that's the easy part. So if I number them, that's what order we would do it in. Then the fun starts, because the next piece we need to do is these half square triangles here and this extra section here. Now I do think that it's important that this square and this rectangle are the same colour, so that when it's made up into a quilt, you just look at that as being one piece instead of it being scrappy. The rest of it really doesn't matter, but that bit, I think, so that you focus more on the flower, will work better if those two are the same colour. The next bit here is really easy to draw, but how I'm going to make it, I don't know at this point, because obviously with the every time you stitch a seam, you take out some of the measurement of the width of the fabric. So like, for example, if I cut a piece that is 2.5 inches wide, I know that my finished squares here are going to be 2 inches. That would be 2 inches, that would be 2 inches, that would be 2 inches by 4 inches, that would be 2 inches by 4 inches, and so on and so forth. That would be 6 inches. Going across the diagonal, it's not that simple, because you would think, oh well, just cut 2.5 inch squares. That's not going to work, and I'll show you why. So you think, well, if you cut that in half, that's going to be the right size. It's not, because that's not how you do it. If you cut it in half, so if we have a cut line here, you still need to stitch it in. So the stitch line will be offset by 1/4 inch from the cutting line. So then straight away you're into the realms of the measurements are different on the diagonal, when you open that out, that square is not going to be the same size as when it started. It's impossible for that to happen. And what we need is for the half square triangle, so when this is opened out into a square that looks as though it's made out of two triangles, so that's a stitch line there, for example. So when you open this part out, you want that to be the same size as that. If you start off with that, this square here as the same size as that, anyone can see if you cut it in half and put some stitch lines on it, there's no way it's going to be the same. So this is the difficulty I have because I don't really understand the geometry of it. I've had several very, very experienced people in the quilting world try and explain it to me, and well, yeah, it was very kind of them, and yeah. So I think the best thing for me to do is to experiment, and I will do 2 experiments. So I will do one square that starts off at 2.75, so 2 3/4 inches, and see what that comes up at the end for the square once it's all stitched together. And I will do another one that is 3 inches square and see what that comes up, because it's really, really easy to trim them down. It's so easy to trim a half square triangle down to the right size, but you can't magic up more fabric from nothing. So that's one of the things I'm going to have to work out. So there'll be 2 sets of half square triangles on each of these blocks, and it's probably easier to just make the sets, cut them up and use them in the same block. And then the very last bit we need to do is to put the last border of blue, which will go here, and then the very last one here. So we were up to number 5, then we've got this piece will be 6, this piece will be 7, and then we'll stitch them on. Then you put these last 2 bits on, so this would be 8 and this would be 9, and then we'd end up with our block. So the block will still end up square, but the centre, from a normal sort of log cabin, the centre has been offset a long way. The centre would be normally here, so it's all the way up there. Then we're building it out here, doing something a little bit different, which we need to go and work that out. So what can you use for this fabric-wise? Well, I have a selection of fabrics that I thought might be useful. So I've got some very blue blues, I've got some more watery blues, I've got odd scraps of stuff. Is this blue or is this purple? Who knows? Some more scrappy bits. Don't know why I put that in. Obviously I thought it was pretty. Now this one, this actually could be the solution for all of the water. I absolutely love this fabric. I don't know where I got it from. I used it for water in a lot of quilts, just as strips, because you can use this side with the gold on it and you can use just the batik on the back. But it's so varied in what it is that it really moves around and it looks like water. It's amazing. But there's a bit of me that's really tempted to use the gold side. So this is another reason why we're testing this out, because I can do 2 blocks. I can do one what I thought it was going to be, and then one that uses all of this and see how that looks. So, and then I've also got this as well. This was from a friend. That's really nice. This, now, is this green or is this blue? Don't know. I really like this. This makes me think of Waterlilies. I don't know why. The one thing I'm really struggling on is the green part of it. See, I don't know whether to go down a sort of teal route. See, if this was cut the right way around, would it look like leaves? Would it look like water lily leaves? I have got some greens somewhere. So I've literally got, what, 3 green things that I thought would be more of the right sort of thing. There's a heck of a lot of blue, and I'm really, really stumped as to what to do for the actual flowers themselves. You know, this is literally all the possibilities I've got, plus that batik I just showed you. This is why, as a textile artist, this is the process. You know, it's like a lot of trial and error. I'm like, I can colour things in. This is all coloured in of what the colours I thought it would be, but there is very 2-dimensional. Pencils are very 2-dimensional. You don't get that massive range in a set of pencils, even with the ones that I have. So, you know, translating this into actual fabric, I think, is probably where the magic happens. You know, it's like on here I've coloured bits in a sort of mauve colour with pink, or I've put magenta with pink. You know, it could be that doesn't work, that it looks a bit off. You know, maybe they should all be the same, cut from the same fabric in each one. I really don't know what's going to work. So what I need to find out today is, how big is this half square triangle? Can I use the same blue fabric with the gold on the background? And should these all be the same fabric? I'm a little bit loath to make either the background or these all the same fabric. because I said it was going to be a scrap quilt, and in my mind's eye it is a scrap quilt, and I'm all about using what you've got. So I'm going to do one block that is just using the two fabrics, so that blue with the gold and then the batik for the flower, and I'm going to do one that is more scrappy, and then I think we'll have a good idea about what it's going to be. And these things are never wasted. I always put my test blocks in a pile somewhere, and I just keep them until such time as I have enough to make an entire quilt, like that's truly scrap quilt, or I build them up until they become cushion covers. So either way, they're not wasted. So let's get going. Some cutting is required. Okay, it's lucky that I am just doing test pieces today, because I've just re-looked up the pictures on the internet. I was right about the variation of colours. So this sort of deep pink magenta that I'm going to do just a test one off with this blue. I think it looks beautiful with this blue, but I also like this as well. So I might even just like mix the scrappiness. I don't have any of the right colour green. This looks really, next to these clear colours, this looks really muddy. This is even worse. It just looks really dull. So does this. And I don't have any bright greens. I think I'm going to go down a different route for the leaves for now, which is to use either this or this one. So I know these are like more bluey, but where I've chosen something that's verging on turquoise and something that's more of a purpley blue, I think I can get away with it. And in one of Monet's versions of the Waterlilies, the leaves were this colour, this sort of teal colour. It was only when I was looking at real Waterlilies that they were like leaf green. In some of his other paintings they were leaf green. So I thought I could probably get away with that, and I think that looks much nicer than that. That's what my test ones are going to be, and then you already saw the other fabrics, so I just need to run an iron over them. So I know the last thing I did was cut out these squares. You might have noticed that I cut all of these strips at 3 inches. Now there's a good reason for that. Because these are only test blocks, I don't know if this is going to become a final quilt, or if this is just literally I'm going to make these 2 blocks and then I am going to do it out of silk ties. I do not know. So in the name of not wasting fabric, what I did was I cut it at the largest measurement that I need. So we talked about doing half square triangles at 3 inches and then 2 3/4 or 2.75 inches. So hence I cut my 3-inch strips, then I cut some 3-inch squares off of them, and then I cut some 2.75 inch squares. And obviously I just lost it because for some reason I cut 3. I can't make that into half square triangles. I can make 1 half square triangle because I need two squares. So we'll just put that on one side and we'll worry about that later. And my theory was, if I make these up into the triangles, I will only do a couple of them. I don't know why I cut all of that, no idea at all. But if 3 inches is too big, we can cut that down. If 2.75 is right, just needs a little trim, then we can cut all of the strips down to 2.75 and it'll be really, really easy to then just cut all of the squares that I need to make these 2 blocks. I think that was my plan. That was the Eleanor that was here yesterday. Sadly, she seems to have gone on vacation. So to do this, you need to get 2 squares, put them right sides together. And then you need to mark the middle line, the line that will actually be the cutting line. So hence you can use a trusty marking implement such as a biro, which is what I'm using. So this is not going to appear on any of the fabric. It won't be there. It'll just get cut through. You can see already I just slightly clipped that point. Now I could go and put that right. Obviously that tip against this ruler is going to move out by it's probably only something like, can you have a 32th of an inch? But that's still enough. So what you have to do is you have to sort of guesstimate by moving the ruler over and drawing the line. I managed to get the top one right, but not the bottom one. It's not a problem. It's literally just a cutting line and a sort of a guideline. Then we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what I do is I put the 1/4 inch line actually on the line I meant to draw. So I put that on there, and then I'll move it back like another line's worth of whatever your rule is, and then I will draw a stitch line, and that should be in the right place, because it needs to be 1/4 inch, but it should also be a scant 1/4 inch, because by the time we've stitched it and then pressed it open to one side, all of those things use up fabric, so we don't want them to come up short. So I'm just going to do the same thing again, start off on the midline, move it back a bit, and then I will do the same thing on the sewing machine as well. And it's important to tell you these things, because everybody just goes, oh yeah, leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. How do you do that when you've got to mark it with something? So it should look like that, with 2 lines going either side of the middle. Before you move it, very important, put some pins in it. Put them in the same direction, facing the same way. So we're going to stitch from this direction both times. We're going to stitch down there and stitch down there, and that just means that it won't pull it out of alignment. If you stitch down one way and then stitch back the other way, it will start to stretch, because of course this is the bias going across this bit, you know, it's really stretchy there. So that's my 2.75 inch one, the test one. So now I need to choose one to do off of here, off of the 3-inch squares. If you look at these squares here, so all of them, all of the half square triangles actually have blue on the other side for the water. So that's really good to know. We'll take this one, this sort of magenta colour. I think we should go for this watery one. I think that's such a cool fabric. And then in this one, choose whichever one is lighter on the back. So obviously the batik is the same pretty much front and back, but the printed fabric is going to be lighter on the back, so you can see your markings a little easier. Okay, and then don't forget to pin it. And hopefully you picked up one of my tips yesterday when I was cutting. Even for squares, I start off with strips. So I do the least amount of cutting possible. So it's actually easier to cut a strip and then cut those pieces off the right size that you want, rather than cutting out each individual square. I'm going to set up my sewing machine and stitch these, and we'll come back and cut them apart and measure them and all sorts of exciting stuff. Okay, I've changed the thread on my sewing machine. I've got purple underneath and green on the top. I figure sometimes it'll be the right colour thread somewhere, just because there's so many colours in this, and I'm trying to use up some bobbins. So I'm going to set my stitch to a little smaller than it would be on the standard thing. So mine's at 2. And then I'm just going to do a straight stitch, and I'm going to stitch down both of these lines. I won't talk through it, my machine is getting very, very elderly. But I will say, this is going to be what makes up the square in a minute. This is the stitching line, but I'm going to stitch alongside the stitching line. And then rather than take out this piece and waste thread, we're going to do what's called chain stitching, where you just keep sewing onto the next piece. See, that's what it looks like, and then just snip through the thread. Okay, so this is what they look like now. So we don't need pins in them anymore. Just cut them in half. It doesn't need to be exact. It doesn't even need to be neat. I'm not going to see this at all. And now sadly, it is time to get the ironing board out. There's no way we can avoid it. These have got to be pressed flat so we can do some measuring. Right, here we are then, with our 2 lots of test samples. I wish my geometry was good enough to just work this out to start with, but even then I figure it's just as well to show you how to try and work something out anyway, so you can modify designs to the specifications that you have, or the amount of fabric you've got. You know, it's not wasted, but an easy way of doing this is to put it behind here, because this is a 2.5 inch rule. I don't think that's quite big enough. That one's a bit wonky anyway. And then of course this was the 3-inch one, which is much better. It's still going to need some trimming down. So here, so we've got 1, 2, 3, and then on it I've got marked, it's got 1/4 inches, and then it's got 1/8 of an inch as well. So I think it's to there, but honestly, when you're cutting so many, it's really, really easy to make a mistake. I actually think it would be easier to cut these down. And also, given that on the design, the half square triangles really don't, they're not that big a deal in amount of fabric. It's not like the whole thing is made out of them and then you've got all that trimming to do. We're literally talking 4 squares per block, which is not a lot. So I think, to be on the safe side, I'm going to keep cutting the 3 inches, which means all the fabric I've cut can be used, so that's good. I'm not going to cut it down at all. And so, isn't that funny that I stopped cutting out the small ones and I literally cut out 3 small ones? And then to use these, we just need to snip these little ears off. So I use scissors, it's quicker, and also you can use the straight edge of the square to take it off in the right place. And then on the back they're folded over to one side, so make them look very, very neat and tidy, even if they're not wildly accurate. I'm snipping these off first because we're going to trim them down, and I promised you that trimming down was easy, and it is easy, although you do need a piece of equipment. It would probably be easiest to do it on this. All of them have a 45-degree line on somewhere. See, it's got 60, 45, 30, and obviously that makes 90 around there. So all of them will have that on there. I don't know why that's up there. That's kind of difficult to use. Because on my bigger one, even on, you know, on this one's got 45 degrees, but it starts down in the corner, which means that it's much easier to trim stuff up, I think. Let's try both of them. We've got 2 squares. We need to put this on here. Do you know what? I'm such an idiot. Look at the other end. It's much easier to measure on that, isn't it, with a grid? But you can measure how big you want it. So we know that it needs to be trimmed down to 2.5 inches. So all you need to do, you don't need to worry about the measurements anywhere. All you need to do is make sure that this line and this line meet up to 2.5 inches. So here's the 2.5 inch mark, and handily it sits right there in the middle, because this is a 5-inch rule for me. So that is much easier. So all I need to do is line this up with this. So I need to line that edge up there, that point up there, and that line along the fold line. And then we can see that anything over needs trimming off. That's it. So now on this one, I can see that the side is very slightly bowed out a bit. So I'm going to make the diagonal even. I'm going to cut these 2 bits off, and then I'm just going to go and snip that side off as well. So just go in here with my rotary cutter and pull back first for something like this, so you can snip all the way. So it's nearly right, but there's this bit here, you'll probably even see it on camera, is just a little bit out. So now all I need to do is just measure 2.5 inches. I don't need to worry about diagonals or anything else. I'm just measuring the square now. It really is the tiniest bit, but things like that can make a huge difference. If you imagine bits like that, if every single piece in the quilt had a bit like that somewhere, eventually you'll get to the point where none of the bits match up. And there's a half square triangle. So that's using this ruler. So I need to use this side and this diagonal to match up with the diagonal there. Okay, what I've tried to do is make sure that the top measurement there and the bottom measurement here are all in the right place, so I know where I'm cutting off from. No, I can't do that. See, I have to match up these 2 bits. Oh, it's not me. It's where they've printed these lines. And also, you have to remember that if you're doing cutting with rules and stuff, that they're not all created the same. So if you're going to be using 2.5 inches on one thing, use the 2.5 inches on that all the time, because sometimes the measurements are ever so slightly off, and a bit like that extra bit of thread, you know, it can make a difference. So right, so they've both been cut now. So this was from this one and this was from this one. Are they the same size? Well, there we go then. I can use that one to square them up, and I can use that one to cut them off, because they're exactly the same. That's fantastic. You often hear people say, oh yeah, you must use the same ruler all the way through, otherwise your stuff's going to be out. Well, here's the thing. Why don't you do a test piece? Do a test piece across all the different rulers and things that you use and see. And then you know that it's complete rubbish and you can use these. Now then, we are on to the rest of the cutting. Right, so you just saw me do a quick dummy run and then mark up these to be stitched together, and I find when I'm developing a new block that this is the best way of doing it, because what works on paper doesn't always work in fabric, so it's a good idea to one, make a sort of a mock-up, try some things out, and then two, lay it out before you stitch anything together. And actually it's just as well I did, because what I hadn't noticed in all the time I have been waffling on about this design is, you see this bit of the middle of the water lily, they're all shades of pink. Now if you do mixed pinks, that's fine. If you're doing all one colour pink, which is what I was doing on the test blocks, that's just a square. And if you want to have a go, that would be a 4.5 inch square that you put in the middle. Simple as that. Cut one of those and you can skip out some stages, which is why you saw me cutting into another fabric, because I thought I've already done it, already cut pieces, and I don't want to waste any more fabric, so I'll mix in a fabric, because I have an inkling that I'm actually going to make this quilt out of the pieces I found. I may well still do one out of silk ties should I get enough before my exhibition, but who knows. So yeah, so it's okay, nothing's going to get wasted. So now I'm going to just put it back into like its mock-up thing. Obviously remember, these pieces are going to look too short because these are going to be stitched together. So if we put it all how it's supposed to be, so if we just put these bits in place, two things. One, it means that we can have a mini meltdown because none of the pieces fit, and that's deliberate because of seam allowance, which I've just explained. And then two, it means that you can make sure you're not actually missing any pieces. We've got to stitch it all together in the right order, so I had a sort of vague stitching order here. So 1 and 2 would be these bits here, then stitch to 3, and then stitch to 4, then stitch to 5. That's easy. Once I'm making more of them, these can actually be strips that I can just cut off. The same with this, I don't necessarily have to measure it out. I've only measured it out just to demonstrate to you. I could literally stitch it on and cut it off, you know, wherever the stitching finishes, like the right measurement, so like you would in normal log cabin. So this is probably the only time I'm going to be measuring this out like this. So it's going to be a little bit of toing and froing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the camera set up on this, and then I can run backwards and forwards to the sewing machine, which is over there, and then I can put each bit down as it's finished, and hopefully that'll be moderately interesting. Oh, and this will all be stitched with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And there it is, finished. And then if we just turn it around the right way, that's what it's going to look like actually in the quilt itself. So I'm going to try and pick up the camera and not shake in a sec, so you can get more of an idea. So I have a question to ask you. Would you rather see more actual sewing? Like, I thought I'd just do something a bit different today, so you could just, you know, watch it growing and seeing what order it's stitched together and all of that. Do you want to see more sewing machine sewing? I personally love watching people sewing on the sewing machine. And there's many people that I watch making clothes, costumes, quilting things, all sorts of things on YouTube. And I love it when they just sit at the sewing machine and they speed it up and I can watch it and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But I'm aware that could just be me. So put something in the comments and let me know. You could just say yes or no, or yes, I love watching you sew on the sewing machine, or no, I can't stand it, it's really annoying, whatever. So this is the finished block, and I have to say, it's great. I love it. I'm a bit sad about this fabric on camera. It doesn't come out anywhere near as effective as it is in real life, and it looks pretty effective on camera, I can see that. It's actually a much deeper blue. I love the leaves and really loving the mixing this together. And I actually think that the right decision would be to make scrap blocks like this one. I'm still going to try out the other two fabrics that I really liked, but there's no reason why we can't incorporate them in the same quilt. These two fabrics, so this one with the gold and then this batik, there'll be some other blocks with different colours, and I think that'll be fine. I think the water part being all the same colour is kind of important. I didn't realise that was going to be a thing, but it is. This being scrappy, fine, absolutely fine. It looks really good. It makes these look like more petals, which I hadn't even considered. So maybe if you were using all one fabric, don't just use one square there, but do what you want. And feel free to have a go at this this pattern that I have designed. It may well already exist in a book, I don't know. I was just messing around with log cabin and thought, what can you do with log cabin? I really want to do something that looks like water lilies. And so that's what I've come up with. Anyway, thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!